I am Pastor Andrew, and this is Theology Thursday. Pop quiz here. What is a phrase, well, a name, if you will, for God that occurs over 261 times in the Old Testament? Give you a few moments to think about that. It is Yahweh Sabaoth. Perhaps you haven't heard of that, but I bet you've heard of this. Lord of Hosts, or Lord of the Armies of Heaven. Today we're going to look at Yahweh Sabaoth and this phrase and what it means and how it's used in the Old Testament. Thanks for joining me. Yahweh Sabaoth, not to be confused with the word Shabbat or Sabbath, which means rest. This is completely different in the Hebrew. This is Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord, Yahweh of armies, of host. God is the head of the cosmic angel armies. And even at times, as we'll see in the Old Testament, the head of the physical, the temporal army of Israel. Now, this name for God, Yahweh Sabaoth, occurs first in the period of the Judges. In the same sentence, that the Lord of Hosts, it's used in a reference to Shiloh, where the Ark of the Lord of the Covenant was kept. Now, some have suggested that because this time of the Judges, as you may recall, was a completely godless time, and people had forgotten God, and so he raised up judges amongst them to kind of, if you will, bring them back. The book of Judges is excellent to read. Perhaps one day we'll do a study on it here. But it was a very violent and a very difficult time in Israel's history, one in which many people had thought that God had abandoned them. So the Lord of Hosts, the Lord of Armies, reaffirms, even in Israel's most difficult time, that of the period of the Judges, that God is the true leader of Israel's armies and Israel itself, in spite of the low spiritual condition of the nation of Israel at that time. That God was still in charge. Yahweh Sabaoth also occurs in 1 Samuel. We see it as something that David speaks when he talks about Goliath. He invokes this name of God. God, he was claiming, is the ruler of everything. He is the army, he is the commander of the armies of heaven. Who can stand up against him? Yahweh Sabaoth. And soon after David would defeat Goliath, Yahweh Sabaoth would take upon less of an idea of this warrior God and more of an idea of this warrior king type God. That the kingship of the Lord as their leader, as their commander, as their protector, as their defender, all of these concepts were summarized in the Hebrew phrase Yahweh Sabaoth. We see this in Psalms 24:10. Who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth. He is the King of glory. Isaiah plays off of the concept of Yahweh Sabaoth a lot, looking to a future time where the Lord is king over all of the earth. The King of Israel, the Yahweh himself, the King of all of the armies of heaven, would put down all that is in rebellion to him, and he will reign as king in Zion, the holy mountain. We see that expressed in Isaiah 31 and also Isaiah 34. All power and authority are under the commander, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the armies, the king, the ruler of the heavenly armies. And of course, this implies many things for us. Yahweh Sabaoth is the one who protects us. He is the one who guards us. He hears the prayers of his people and he responds, as we see in Psalms 80. There is no other king, there is no other God like Yahweh Sabaoth, the one who fights for us, the God of heavenly armies. Now, As a side note here, Sabaoth can also refer to earthly armies. It can refer to an earthly ruler of an army, okay? So we might say, let's say, King Smith is the Sabaoth of his army, is the leader of his army. So we have to look at textual clues. That's why in the English, where Lord is capitalized, you would say the Lord of hosts or the Lord of armies. We are talking about the divine. We're talking about God himself, Yahweh himself, Yahweh Sabaoth, the leader of the armies of heaven. So just keep that in mind when you read through the scriptures. If you see Lord in front of that, it's a direct reference to God. So you know that when you see the Lord of hosts or the Lord of the armies of heaven, we're talking about Yahweh, we're talking about God himself. Now, it's interesting that this is not just a concept in the Old Testament. In the New Testament as well, St. John writes about this in the book of Revelation, Revelation 19, where he talks about the Lord of hosts is the commander of the armies of heaven who has defeated all of his enemies of the world. And he refers to the person, Jesus Christ, as Yahweh Sabaoth, the one who is the ruler of the armies of heaven, who has defeated everything, sin, death, the power of the devil, everything that is against him. He is the ruling and reigning king, and he is the commander of the conquering army. So as you can see, this is kind of a complex phrase, Yahweh Sabaoth. It has some meanings to it depending on the text and depending on some of the contextual clues. But as long as you see it as the leader of God, God as the leader of his army, the divine commander of the heavenly armies, you'll be okay as you work through the Old Testament with the phrase Yahweh Sabaoth. If you want an interesting study, go to Psalms 46:7, Psalms 46:7, and I'll show you how this is translated differently. So the New King James Version translates Yahweh Sabaoth as the Lord of hosts is with us. In the Contemporary English Bible, Psalms 46 verse 7 is translated, the Lord of armies is with us. In Psalms 46:7 again, in the New International Version, Yahweh Sabaoth is translated, the Lord Almighty. And the New Living Translation, Yahweh Sabaoth is the Lord of heaven. All of these meanings are correct. He's the warrior God, the one who fights for us. Ultimately, we see the warrior God in Jesus Christ, the one who fought for us, who went to the cross, who battled the forces of darkness, who conquered Satan, who destroyed death and the devil by raising on the third day. He is Yahweh Sabaoth, the commander of the angelic armies, the one who fights for you. Thanks for joining me today on Theology Thursday. God's peace to you. The Yahweh Sabaoth is with you. Take care.